stands for creating a safe place. This is Young Life's way of making sure that kids are safe, most of all, making sure that you are safe, that you are protected from liabilities of any kind, and protecting Young Life as an organization from liabilities, but also just protecting the reputation of Young Life, because that's how we get to do what we get to do, is we have a good reputation.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay.
There we go. All right. So first and foremost, Young Life has a responsibility, both legally and ethically, to make sure that we manage risk and reduce risk. So we do that in a number of ways. First of all, we screen volunteers. So we have policies about how volunteers get to be volunteers. So if any of you are here and you do not yet have a criminal record check, first and foremost, that needs to happen right away. And until your criminal record check comes in, you are not to be alone with teenagers at all for any reason. We also talk about the kinds of behavior that we want to have, both when we're with kids and when we're without kids. We want to make sure that the way that we behave on social media, the way that we are out in public, where we might see parents and things, where we are walking out a life that keeps kids safe, that sets a good example for kids, and represents the organization of Young Life well. If you are a volunteer who's gone through volunteer training, then you should have seen a couple of documents that talk about conduct and about how we manage ourselves. And then one of the other things we do is that we do really good training. So not only do we do leader training, teach you how to do mixers and part skits and yada, 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 but we also want to do some training around things like mental health and abuse and how to respond when you hear things. We want to do some training around how we behave when we have kids in our vehicle, or when we're out in public with kids, or when we're taking kids camping. And all of that training is in this CASP program, this creating a safe place. So again, I just want to reiterate, we are always keeping kids safe. We are always protecting you, the leader, from liability, and we are protecting Young Life as an organization. And so all of the things that we're going to talk about today is about doing those three things. So we're going to start with some things around contact work. So you guys know that we volunteer in schools, we volunteer out in the community, we spend a lot of time hanging out with kids. And there's some policies we have around hanging out with kids that, again, is just going to keep you protected and make sure that kids are safe. So first and foremost, don't be alone in a private place with teens. If you're doing a one-on-one, if you're hanging out with a kid, make sure you're in a public place. Don't go to the kid's house and hang out in their bedroom, obviously. Be somewhere where other people see you. It doesn't mean that you can't have a private conversation. It just means that you're out in public and you're making sure that you're kind of being above board. Establish really good boundaries around space and touch. Make sure that you aren't getting in kids' spaces, especially kids who haven't invited you in. If a kid, is like, wants a hug or whatever, that's great. But, don't linger with those hugs. Be careful about who you're hugging. Be aware, is that a kid that you know? Is that a kid who's a different gender than you? Really think through kind of the way, healthy physical touch is important, but really think about the ways that you do that. And remember the fact that just because you're a hugger doesn't mean everyone else is a hugger. And you want to make sure that kids always feel safe in your presence. Establish boundaries around social media. So we are all on Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or all these different things. And there's some really important things that you need to be aware of. One of them, for instance, is be aware of the kind of social media that you're using. If you are on Snapchat, it's really easy to delete histories from Snapchat. And so even if you take screenshots of everything, you have no way of proving that you didn't take a screenshot of something else. So being on Snapchat with kids puts you at risk of being accused of things and not being able to defend yourself. There's a difference when it's Facebook or Instagram or texting, because in those circumstances, if something gets deleted, you can kind of prove it was deleted because it takes a part out of a thread. So those things kind of manage records differently. So it's safer to be in a text message or in a Facebook message or an Instagram message, telling kids about camp or whatever it is. My personal policy is I don't Snapchat with teens. I just stay totally away from that just to be on the safe side. Something else you need to be aware of, that if a kid messages you something inappropriate, if it is a kid in a stage of undress or anything like that, our current Canadian laws is that you can be charged with possession of child pornography. So it's another really good reason to be really, really, really careful about what kind of social media you engage in, because you just never know, and you want to keep yourself safe and you want to keep teenagers safe. It also helps to set good boundaries for them about how they communicate with adults. When you have good, clear boundaries, you're modeling what it should look like for other adults in their life to have good, clear boundaries as well. And then keep in mind that obviously we all need to talk to kids, and they don't call on the phone anymore. They are in text messages, they are in Instagram. That is where we find kids, and our job is to be in the world of kids. So obviously we're going to use these tools. Again, think about how you use them. So for instance, if I've got a kid who I don't know very well, who's messaging me privately on Facebook, I might, and it's a male kid, I might invite a male leader into that conversation. Facebook's great because you can just add someone to a message. I'll invite a male leader into that conversation and maybe say something like, well, Aaron's also going to West Edmonton Mall. I bet you he could give you some really good tips on the best stores to show up at or whatever. I'll find an excuse to invite someone else into that conversation. So I'm not having a one-on-one digitally with that kid. Now that might seem like overreacting to you, but the truth is that spending time privately messaging somebody does feel like one-on-one time. It doesn't matter if you're messaging 10 people at a time. When you have a one-on-one thread, that feels intimate. And so you want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in a place of giving any kid the wrong idea or creating any unsafe attachments for that kid. And once again, by being honest and clear about those boundaries, you're also modeling how adults should be treating them. So that's keeping kids safe, it's keeping you safe, and it's keeping young life safe. Another thing to note about the contact work we do when we're out in the community is how your use of alcohol and, now that it's legal, marijuana. Now, personally, I think that we should not be using some of these things, and if we are, it should be in extreme moderation. I think scripture is clear about that. But I'm also not naive, and I know that there's lots of us that will go out to the pub and have a drink. But you might find yourself in a situation, for instance, after this leaders meeting. Maybe you're going to go down and you're going to have some tachos at Kelly's. If you have junior leaders there, it's really important that that's not the time you choose to have an alcoholic beverage. That instead, you're just being really, really above board, totally above reproach, and you're going to have yourself a pop or a Virgin Caesar, but just avoid the alcohol when kids are in your presence. Again, we're modeling for teenagers. We're also making sure that we're keeping ourselves safe and young life safe from any kind of accusations. It's really, really important that we remember that. And it might seem like a bummer that you can't have your Caesar on a Sunday night. I totally get it. But the truth is, one of the things that we like to be able to model to kids is that we can have a great time and be in each other's company. We don't have to do that with alcohol. So if you have any junior leaders who are minors, avoid the grown-up beverages. All right, we're going to move from contact work and we're going to go to club.
Sarah, can I interrupt you for a quick question that was asked?
Oh, yes, for sure.
I believe the question is, what do you do if you do get sent a nude image, i.e. unsolicited child pornography?
We will talk about reporting, absolutely everything that needs reporting at the end, because that's kind of the thing actually I want you to stick in your brains today. If you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember how to report if there's anything you think you might have to. So we're going to do that at the very end. But it's definitely something you report right away. Awesome. Good question, guys. Excellent. All right, so club. Things we need to know about creating a safe place at club. So you need to make sure that you are taking proactive steps to ensure that all of our activities are safe. So you need to exercise leadership and intervene before things go too far. Now, I know that we like to take risks, and I know that I often have my mom voice on, and somewhere in between there is probably the best place for Young Life to exist. But we have a handy little list of banned activities so that I don't have to decide as a mom what I think is unsafe, and you don't have to decide as a leader what you think should definitely be fun. So our banned activities list so far includes ingesting any substance that could cause a potentially harmful physical reaction. So for instance, we are not allowed to do like the cinnamon challenge. We're not allowed to do chubby bunny. We're not allowed to do anything that's going to make a kid throw up. So that's important to remember. On the banned list is anything that causes teenagers to run into or kick each other. So kind of the games where you start from four corners of the field and you run at each other. If they're going to run into each other, that is on the banned activities list. Slip and slides are on the banned activities list. Anything that prevents a participant from breathing normally. So we used to have this game where you'd like wrap somebody in saran wrap. Because that could prevent somebody from breathing normally, that's on the banned activities list. We also can't play any games that participants are not able to cushion themselves from a fall. So again, that game would be out for that reason, but anything that kind of restrains or binds arms, where kids have to run or anything, that is on the banned list. And any game that could cause harm or distress to an animal is on the banned list, and anything that would involve direct contact between an animal and a child's eyes, lips, or mouth. So for any of you who may have fished for goldfish at some point, we do not play that game anymore. So that's on the banned activities list. You want to make sure that you have proper supervision at Young Life events. So if you're going to do a big event that's like different than club, and you know for sure you're going to have a lot of extra kids there, make sure you have extra adult volunteers. Don't have more kids than you have good leadership for. And I think that's just common sense. And I'm sure that we've all been places where that is not the case. And I'm sure we've all heard stories from our students about when that has not been the case and the kind of trouble they've gotten into. So this one I think is really important. This is my mom voice now coming out. We are stewarding other people's children. These are precious human beings that other people are raising, and we need to make sure that we're keeping them safe. And when they entrust us with their kids, we have to be sure that we are supervising them well. So make sure you have enough leadership to make that event great. A benchmark for events that are not camp is you should have at least 1 leader per 15 teenagers. More is better, but that's the benchmark for the least amount of leaders you should have for a group. I'm going to take a couple of seconds to talk about driving. My leaders have all heard this on numerous occasions. It's okay to hear it again. First of all, we have a policy that you don't drive anybody alone of the opposite gender. So if you are driving a co-ed vehicle home, drop off a kid last who is the same gender as you. And preferably somebody you know really well and trust, because nowadays gender doesn't necessarily protect you from those accusations or from misunderstood intentions. So make sure the last kid you drop off is somebody you know really well, who is the same gender as you. We cannot have anybody who is under 19 driving teens at all. So even if we have a leader who's 18 and is a great driver, until they are 19, they are not to drive any kids from or to Young Life Club. And finally, who's giggling over here? What's going on? All right, I'll ignore you. And finally, you have to have a driver's abstract if you're driving kids. So if you don't have a driver's abstract yet, please, please, please make sure that you get that from your area director, and get that in right away, because we should not have anybody driving kids who doesn't have their driver's abstract filled out. And team leaders, and I know you have team leaders in all of the areas here, please make sure that your leaders have their driver's abstract. You are responsible for what happens at your club, so make sure that that is available. And this is the last thing that's really important. We have non-owned liability insurance for travel to and from camp, but we do not have non-owned liability insurance for things like driving for contact work or driving to and from club. So you are doing that at your own risk. Young Life does not cover that insurance-wise at all. And so that is something that you just need to be really aware of. And if for whatever reason you're uncomfortable doing that, you need to let your team leader know as soon as possible. And I think this goes without saying, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. You need to comply with all of the driving laws, including and especially making sure everyone in your vehicle is wearing a seatbelt and that you are not speeding. And I'm going to reiterate that because I know some of you guys like to do some games in the vehicle and like to get places quickly. But the reality is not only do we really, really need to keep those kids safe, and speeding does increase the risk of accidents. So that's the first thing we're keeping safe. Second of all, we are still keeping you, the leader, safe from accusations. When a kid goes home and tells their parents that their leader was speeding, that does not look good on you. In fact, that comes back to your staff person more often than you may think. And last, and I think most importantly to me as a mom, you are still setting an example, and especially if you're in a high school club, you're setting an example for young drivers who are just learning how to drive. So please set a good one. Don't speed. Everybody wear your seatbelt. All right, so that is the basics of creating a safe space at club. Now we're going to talk about camp very briefly, because most of the camp stuff for you guys is kind of set out for you, but I want you to understand why we do what we do. So with camp, anytime you are taking kids overnight, or my policy is anytime you're heading on a highway, even if it's a day trip, and anytime you're doing anything that's like kind of dangerous, like climbing walls or things like that, you absolutely have to have parental consent and medical release forms. Now, the upside to making sure you have these is that built into our release forms is also photo forms. And it's really nice to have those because we cannot put any kid's picture on social media without their parental consent. So having an excuse to get a parental consent form anyway is great. So anytime you're going on the highway, anytime you're doing anything dangerous, and anytime you're going overnight, you need medical release forms. There are two forms that we use. One is for Rockridge and one is for everything else. It's called the day and weekend trip form. And this is the part where I'm going to get Adrian to just share our Mission Central. So Adrian, please make sure you're logged out. Every single one of you guys has access to this. So Adrian is going to type leader into the username or email address, just the word leader. And this will be everyone who's not on staff. This is your access code. Now the password, I don't think you can make it show. Can you make it show password, Adrian?
No, I can't.
Okay, so the password is full with a capital F, lowercase ULL, access, capital A, lowercase, everything else. So full access, all one word. And then you have this. And if you go into leader, click down, you can look at leader training for camp. You can look at summer at Rockridge. You can look at kid and club instructions. And this has a lot of the information I've already given you. If you go to summer at Rockridge and scroll down, you have the Rockridge Canyon consent and health form. So you can use this for all of the trips to Rockridge. So that is where you find that. If you're like, I can't get a hold of my area director and I need it, that's where you find that. But if you'll notice where Adrian scrolled down, you can also find all the videos and things that you need to like let kids know about camp. If you go up a little bit more, you can look at work crew and summer staff and how to apply. You can look at the trip coordinator info. You can even find out what your camp week is. When it's up, it's not up yet. But that's where all that information is. Unfortunately, I also thought that page had the other health form. And so I will find that for you. Maybe it's in camp promo and signups or kids and club instructions. Back to the bottom. Nope. All right. Well, I will find that for you. In the meantime, you can go through this. If you see anything that you think, oh, I wish that was available to me on Mission Central, please talk to your area director and let us know. Oh, it's on the Young Life website from Shireen. There you go. So if you go on the younglife.ca website, you can find the health trip form there.
Yeah, you can just search forms there too, Sarah, on the Mission Central part.
The leaders can't necessarily find them that way. That only comes on the staff stuff. They have less access. Yeah, volunteers have less access. Forms, there they are. So that's the younglife.ca, and there it is. Day weekend trip forms. There you go. And there's the permission to use photo. If you don't have an excuse to get one of those other ones, then you can just use that to get photos on Facebook or Instagram or all of the other places you guys put photos. All right, you can unshare now, Adrian. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. You have to have a minimum of 2 leaders present for all overnight activities. So if you're like thinking, I just want to take my 5 guys camping, just make sure you bring another leader. It's really important if something happens, if there's an emergency, you want that other leader. But the other thing is, once again, you don't want to be alone. You want to make sure that you kind of always have a witness around who's going to protect you from any kind of liability as well. At camp, anytime we're going overnight, and also when we're at Rockridge, we have a policy of 1 leader to every 5 wildlife kids and 1 leader to every 7 high school kids. And so that's just, that's our policy. Obviously, it doesn't work exactly that way all the time, but we try really hard to have at least that many leaders to that ratio of kids. All right, now, we're going to do this last section, and then I'm going to get into kind of what it looks like when kids are disclosing things to you. So this last section is kind of, it's kind of the kids you're hanging out with, your one-on-ones or your campaigner kids or the kids you've gotten to know really well. These are some things that you want to keep in mind, creating a safe space for them. So take notes whenever a teenager appears aloof or withdrawn or exhibits any kind of personality change. So if you've spent a lot of time with a kid and they're suddenly acting different or acting out or withdrawing from club or campaigners, pay attention. Don't just let that, go or roll off. Like, just pay attention to those things. You might be one of the few adults in their life who has the kind of contact you do with them. And so if that kind of thing is going on, that is often a warning sign. When you talk to kids, maybe you're talking to them about that aloofness and you're asking them, make sure that you respect their confidentiality. Don't go talking to other leaders. Don't go talking to other kids about it. And unless you have to, don't even talk to their parents about it. You are somebody that these teenagers really trust. And so unless it is an issue of safety or health or harm, you need to respect that confidentiality. Now, kids might share stuff with you that's like really hard and you're worried about them and you might feel like you need to talk about that. Then you pick that one person, and that would be like your team leader or your area director. So don't go have a round table with all your leaders about that kid. Pick the most leadery leader you have and say, hey, can I talk to you about that? And be aware of your own capacity to be helpful. We are not counselors. Even if you get mental health first aid, even if you do lots of other things, we are not counselors. We're not qualified to be counselors. And so if kids are sharing really deep, hard stuff with you, just be really aware of what your level of competency is in being able to help them, and then get them other help. It's actually a really good idea to create networks for people anyway. You should never be someone's only person. If somebody discloses something to you, something about abuse or any kind of harm, don't ask for details. And there's a couple of reasons we don't ask for details. First of all, we don't want to risk re-traumatizing kids. And second of all, when kids are disclosing something that might need to be taken to court or followed up on in a legal way, it's really important that we don't muddy the waters or the details. And so we want to get them to a trained expert to be able to get those details from them in a way that it's going to be clear and concise and not going to mess with their memory of events. And then we are going to report. So it doesn't matter if it's a current danger or a past danger. Even if a kid is absolutely out of the situation of abuse, if they're disclosing it to you, you need to make sure that you're reporting it. If you are at camp when something is reported, talk to your head leader right away. And if you're not at camp, talk to your area director right away. This is your responsibility as a volunteer leader. So you don't get to decide that you're not going to report something. These are actually, these aren't even Young Life policies. This is the law in Canada that there are reportable things that you absolutely have to take up the chain, that you cannot carry yourself. And so make sure that you do that. So anything that you need to report would be under the category of self-harm. So if a kid is harming themselves, you have to report that. You can't keep that secret. If that kid is expressing any kind of suicidal ideation, so even if they say, like, I'm not planning on killing myself, but I think about it sometimes. As soon as it's suicidal ideation, we have to report it. Any kind of abuse, so if they are in harm's way or if they are talking to you about harming someone else, that we absolutely have to report. And any kind of sexual assault, and it doesn't matter where it's coming from or how long ago it was, we have to report it. And we can talk about some of the ways that we can do that and still maintain the trust of a teen towards the end. Okay, so this is how we're going to report. We have 4 different R's. Does anybody remember them from last year? Does anyone remember our 4 R's after we've been disclosed to? And that is why we do CASP every year, my friends. Awesome. All right, so the first R is recognize. The second R is respond. The third R is refer. And the fourth R is report. Okay, so the first R is when a teen first comes to you, make sure that you take his or her word seriously. Do not promise a teen ever that you will not tell anyone. You absolutely need to recognize, this is where the R comes in, that this is a situation that is above your pay grade, and you need to help that teen, even if they don't want it, by reporting to somebody who can help. So you can give emotional support. You can remind the teenager that it's not his or her fault. You can reassure them that they were right to tell you about the problem, but do not probe for details or ask them to retell the story of what happened to them. Our role is to listen and help encourage our friends and then connect them to a trained resource who can help them. So we don't counsel them ourselves when they disclose something to us. Take allegations very seriously and do not prejudge the situation. If danger is imminent, take action to ensure the teenager's safety. Show care and support to them, and if appropriate, to their family. And then make a written record and include any details of what happened and who they talked to and who you talked to and any witnesses. You need to make sure that you write everything down. So as soon as you can, make sure that you just make point form details of everything you can, and even how you responded and what you did. Because we will likely, in a case where a kid is disclosed to you, we will need to do an incident report, and you will need to provide all those details. As soon as you are not with the kid, you will talk to your area director right away, and then we'll tell you what to do for next steps. Now, I'm going to just pause here. So as soon as you recognize that you're in this situation, what I would love for you not to think to yourself is, I will handle this tomorrow, or I will handle this next week. If kids are disclosing something to you that's one of these big category things, we need to make sure that we are responding right away. if anything happens to that kid, if any harm comes to them, in the space it takes us to take a break and think about what we're going to do, that's on us. And we need to make sure, again, first and foremost, we're keeping kids safe. And the second thing is we want to protect you. So if something happens because you didn't disclose something to the appropriate authorities, that you didn't take that up the food chain, that would be terrible. We don't want that to happen to you. We want to keep you safe. So we don't want you to realize that because you didn't report right away, something went down. And again, we don't want Young Life as an organization because it affects our ability to do the work we do everywhere, when we don't have well-trained volunteers who understand how to do this process well. So the moment you hear something from a kid, you're like, wait a second, that's a red flag. You need to recognize that this is that moment where you are on and you need to start walking through these R's. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to respond to that teenager. So if you, and this is the place where we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do that without breaking their trust. The reality is that some kids are going to be mad at you for reporting. So I had a kid recently who is 19 years old and just gave me heck because I reported her self-harm to her school counselor when she was 13. And she just now is like, why'd you do that? You know, you got me in so much trouble. It's like, dude, that's not a secret I can keep for you. So the first thing you're going to do once you've recognized that this is the situation is you're going to respond by saying, hey, I want you to know you are so important to me, but because you're important to me, that's not a secret I can keep. I am not equipped to make this better for you, and it's really important that we get the right people involved. So you respond by making sure they understand that they're not in trouble, that you're going to walk through this with them, but that you cannot carry this secret on your own. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to identify who is the person that needs to know next. If they're disclosing that their parents are abusing them, you are obviously not going to report to their parents. That wouldn't be good. So if you need some help with that, that's the place where you ask your area director and they'll help you to navigate who the next person that you report to is. But you give the kids a heads up and you make sure that they know, hey, I'm in this with you, but I need to tell my area director that this is what's going on. If you do have to go to the parents, one of the things I like to do with kids is I'll say, I'll go with you. Do you want to tell them or do you want me to tell them? What I'm not going to do is tell the kid I'm not going to tell their parents and then go behind their back. But I will say, whether you come with me or not, I need to make sure your parents know this is happening. But I want to always give that kid the opportunity to be part of the process so that they don't feel like I'm going against them. You're not going to help it. Some kids are going to be mad at you. And the reality is that it is more important to keep that kid safe than it is to keep how they think about you safe. So make sure that you're keeping that kid safe. All right, so reporting looks like this. Any person who has reasonable grounds to believe that a teenager is in need of protection is legally required. Legally required, not just by Young Life, legally required to report the matter to the relevant child protection agency in your province. Failure to report in these circumstances violates the law and may be considered an offense. You could potentially be charged if you leave a kid in harm's way and you know that it was happening. Historical abuse or neglect, that is abuse or neglect which occurred in the not very recent past, still must be reported wherever there are reasonable grounds to believe that a teen may be in need of protection. If the alleged offender is in regular contact with the teenager, irrespective of whether it is the same teenager abused in the past, there may be grounds to believe that a teenager is at risk based on the offender's past behavior. It is particularly vital to report these cases where the alleged abuser is in a position of trust concerning teens, whether it is the same teenager or not. So we need to make sure that those sorts of things are reported immediately to the appropriate authorities. Then we need to make sure that we report to Young Life. And we're going to do this in any of these cases. So whether it's abuse, harassment, bullying, sexual abuse, self-harm, any of these things. But we're also going to report to Young Life if anything has happened, like someone's been in a car accident or somebody broke their arm, like any of those kinds of things. if there's any medical attention required ever, or any report of any kind required because of something we've done, we need to make sure that we report to Young Life right away. We do this for a number of reasons. First of all, we want to make sure that we've done the right thing. So our HR department is going to make sure they go through those reports and go, oh shoot, you guys need to make sure you call social services about that one, or you need to make sure you call the school about that one. They're going to make sure that we have crossed all of our T's and dotted all of our I's. And the other thing that it does is it makes sure that they get a heads up, so that if a parent calls national office, or if some sort of other organization in the community like the police call the national office, they've got a heads up. They're not surprised by that. And so they're able to respond in a way that also protects kids, protects you, and protects Young Life. When we report, we use an incident report, and your area director can help you complete that. They have access to that on Mission Central, and it will be emailed to incident@younglife.ca. And it will be copied to the regional director. So any area directors on the call, we need to CC that to the regional director. So that's any kind of disclosure, any kind of injury, any kind of something went wrong today. We need to make sure that we report that to Young Life. Even if you're in a little fender bender, if you like hit a ditch and kids are late getting back to their parents, that's an incident report. Again, it only takes one parent to get that phone call in to national office and then go, we have no idea what's going on. Doesn't look good. So even if everybody's safe, if it's a moment of like, I wonder if this is reportable, call your area director right away. All right. We've talked about all of those procedures. So we're gonna take a couple of minutes. We're gonna talk about what to do if something's going wrong on social media. And then we're just gonna open it up for questions about social media, about boundaries, about anything, vehicles, whatever you guys wanna ask. But first, let's just very quickly, so the question was asked before, what if somebody sends you something they shouldn't? First thing you're gonna do is you're going to call your area director immediately. You are gonna write an incident report. You're going to tell that kid that that's wildly inappropriate and please don't send you those things. And then we are going to talk to our HR department about the best way to proceed. If you do that immediately, again, if you're not on something like Snapchat, things are time-stamped. If you respond with that's not okay right away, then there's a record of that. If you do that in Snapchat, there's no way to prove that something else, you didn't say something else that wasn't deleted, because Snapchat doesn't hold records the same way. So it's really important that you just are aware of the risks you're taking in different social media, but make sure you respond to the kid right away, make sure you talk to your area director right away, make sure you get an incident report in right away, so that we can help make sure that your reputation and your liability is protected. Okay, so anybody have any questions about anything at all?
Just a reminder to, if you're going to ask them verbally, to unmute yourself, or you can use the chat and I'll relay them to Sarah.
Also, I'm just going to take 1 second. There are 3 things that we're trying to protect, and there are 4 R's about how to deal with disclosures. Can somebody just repeat them to me so I know you're listening? What are the 3 things we're protecting with CASP? Shiloh, you need to unmute, sweetie. I saw your hand. Somebody in. There you go.
Recognize.
First, okay, we're doing R's first. Recognize. Yeah.
Yeah, we're muted.
Report. That's the 3rd one. Yeah.
React.
Wait, what?
No.
Wait.
Refer.
There's no react. It's refer and then report. Good job.
Okay.
I said
So-
Good job. Wait, what are the 3 things we're protecting with CASP?
Kids, leaders, and
Kids, leaders, young life.
Good job. All right. It's like you weren't sleeping. You all look like you're sleeping. Stefan has a stuffed animal. Okay, any questions? No questions.
Sarah, you mentioning you mentioned bullying in the, the realm of things we need to report.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like the one thing I'm wondering is just like, where do we decide what is bullying and not? Like we've got groups of kids in our area who, they can joke around with others, but at times they can be just real jerks to each other, which would seem like bullying. Is that the kind of time we would, note that down, or would we report it? Like if it's a continuous thing we've seen?
Yeah, I think, like, are you talking about at club?
I'm talking about like the relationships between students. So like students that I'm seeing at school, I'm seeing at club, I'm seeing at camp, like
Right.
the way they interact with each other, although they may be friends, is a relationship that looks like bullying.
So this is how I would handle that. If it's a group of friends, then I'm not feeling like that sounds like bullying to me. That sounds like kids that are bugging each other, right? Like
Right.
Bullying is, it's like kind of ongoing, like someone is harassing somebody else, somebody is tearing them down on a regular basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cause long-term harm. You need to make sure that you're dealing with that situation. But if you've got a group of kids that are just jerks to each other and they're hanging out with you, I would say that's one of those opportunities for you to provide leadership and to sit them down and say, guys, I'm noticing this, and this doesn't really feel real healthy or real honoring. What's up with that, you guys? And if you feel like there's a particular kid that's being like, because we do know that bullying can still happen within friend groups. There can still be that kid who's kind of the butt of every joke. If you feel like there's that kid, go ahead and ask some more questions. And if you're ever in doubt, talk to your area director or your regional director. If there's any moment when you're like, this doesn't seem right, I'm not sure what I should do, ask. Always err on the side of asking.
Okay, sure.
Anybody else?
You guys have any questions?
All right, so I have 2 questions. And I'm going to let you just raise your hands. How many of you guys, upon hearing kind of the expectations around driving, felt like any of that was unreasonable or too safe? Anybody? Stefan Sloth is concerned. Okay, I'm ignoring my leaders. Okay, my second.
Okay, we have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, because we have a couple of guys here who have their ends, so they can take like one person, and that's like part of their insurance. So why is that an issue?
If they're 19, they can.
They're not.
Then they can't. They're not.
Why?
Allowed. Because that's
their personal insurance covers them.
It's Young Life policy that we're not allowed to have kids in the car with a 19-year-old or with an under 19-year-old driver. So if they come to club, it's in the policy. If they come to club and they're coming on their own, they're coming on their own, and I'm not. But if I'm a leader and I'm sending a junior leader pick up somebody or send somebody home, that is not Young Life policy. So
I think it's the same rule.
Even if it's like they're now leaving club and they're going to Dairy Queen, I haven't told them to take anyone or do any of that.
I would say it is not Young Life policy for us to put kids in a car with somebody who's under.
I haven't put anybody in a car.
All I'm saying is the policy of Young Life. I am not making any recommendations or not recommendations.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Policy of Young Life is.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Does that include like kids who just have an N? They can just drive. Like, do we have to stop them from driving their friends because they're not 19?
See, that's the thing, right? Like some kids are coming to club with their friends already, and their parents know that they've picked them up. This is referring to what we as leaders are deliberately choosing to do. So if we if we're all going to I don't know, play laser tag, I can't say to Simon, can you go pick up Joe from his house? I can't say that because Simon is 17 and he is not old enough, and I'm not allowed to tell him to go pick up kids. So.
But if Simon brings his friend but if Simon were to like bring his friend Joe, I have no idea how the kids who didn't get picked up by leaders got to club. But like if Joe was a lead, if whatever was a leader and knows the kid's family, and it's like, hey, can I pick up your kid? Like if there's like, I
Young
know.
Life policy says we can't have anyone who's under 19 picking up kids for Young Life.
I think these are great questions.
These are great questions.
And it's great to hear the rubber hitting the road as you realize some of the situations that you get yourself in. And this is all about much like the relationships you might have, like just like, you know, these stories where that kid just needed a hug, or I was driving so and so home. These are situations where this is higher standard than normal, because we want to be above reproach, that even there wouldn't even be a suspicion that something negative could have happened. So as soon as we have a leader, if we had a situation where something happened and we had someone under 19, we have a policy around this to protect ourselves, not the car policy, but from other, I believe it's got to do with more lawsuits that could happen towards Young Life. And so we have a policy of 19-year-old leaders and older because of, you know, stats, let's say. No offense to anybody under 19 who drives, but the statistics aren't favorable. But because of all that, we can be looked upon as not caring for kids in doing so. And even if we didn't, if we're like, well, I didn't ask him to drive, is he a Young Life leader? Yes. Did they drive them? Yes. Was it to or from a Young Life event? Yes. Even if we didn't ask, that won't hold up. So we saying, but I didn't ask him, it doesn't hold up in court, is what we're trying to. In this case, that's protecting the organization and protecting the person who's the Young Life leader. So hope that clarifies it, of why that is a little bit. But is it above and beyond normal? Yes. Are these kids allowed to, are these, you know, old teenagers, young adults allowed to drive, you know, kids in their car at some, you know, to whatever level of license they have? Yes. Our policy's a higher standard than that for those reasons. Great questions. And we know this has implications for the challenges we face as we try and connect with kids and gather them into places.
Any more questions about driving? Yes, Brayden.
We have a question, but it's not about driving.
Okay.
So if me as a leader, I have suspicions that a student might be self-harming, but they haven't specifically told me, what am I allowed to do? Like, am I allowed to or supposed to dig about that, or do I leave that?
Okay, so when we say like not to ask details, it's a matter of like, if a kid has disclosed a story to you, we want to be careful not to kind of muddy the waters of that story.
Yeah.
But in any case of you, if you suspect anything, absolutely.
Okay.
Again, especially now, especially in the culture we're living in right now, what we're experiencing is very few teenagers have adults in their lives that are paying a lot of attention. And so psychologists call that adult scaffolding. They don't have a lot of adult scaffolding in their life. There's not a lot of people that see them on a regular basis to notice stuff. If you are noticing stuff, absolutely act on it, because you are the only one.
And this would be kind of another situation where you're noting those changes or those actions.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's see.
And you know, a kid might lie to you. You might not get to the truth of the matter, and that might be really frustrating because it doesn't feel like there's anything to report then, right? But I would say, yeah, absolutely, go talk to that kid. Try and pay attention. You know, I had a girl who I knew was cutting, and so my thought was, hey, we should do a beach day, because I thought, as soon as I get you in a bathing suit, I'm going to notice if you're trying to cover your arms up while you're wearing a bathing suit. So, you know, so I just found ways to go, how can I find a way to just see her arms? because that's what I'm suspecting, is that she's cutting her arms. So absolutely, because like I said, you might be the only person who's really close enough to be noticing, and it would be just terrible if you didn't. So
yeah,
follow through on that.
that's okay. Sweet.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Unfortunately, what that does, and let's be really honest, that puts you in a position of, you are now, once you start down that line, you now become responsible for that information. So
Yeah.
if you, for whatever reason, feel like you can't handle that, I would say talk to your team leader or your area director or another leader who has a relationship with that kid, if you really feel like you can't manage that situation, and then have them follow up.
Okay, sure.
And once you start following up, you are in it. Okay, anybody?
What if like a kid discloses someone else's like self-harming or something, but a kid that you don't know, would that still be, you would still report that even though you don't know the kid or you've never met the kid?
Yes. As soon as you know that there's a minor who is at risk or in harm's way, you have a responsibility legally to report that. Unfortunately, fortunately, you're not worrying about keeping your relationship with that kid you don't know, so you can just report it. You are going to worry about the relationship with the kid that disclosed to you, because they might be holding a secret for someone else. That's a great opportunity for you to say, you know what, neither of us are qualified to hold that secret. They should have asked you to hold that secret. That's a big secret, and we really need to do something about it and keep so-and-so safe. So the upside is you're not going to have to worry about whether or not that kid's going to be mad at you for disclosing. You are going to have to figure out who you are supposed to report to. So it depends on what the disclosure was, which again, you ask your area director for that help. Anybody else? Okay, oh, go ahead.
So we were just talking, if someone told you they were pregnant, does that fall under the needing to report it?
Technically, no. Yeah, that is not, that's not considered abuse or self-harm or anything. But I would say, for many reasons, from my personal experience, I would say you definitely want to try and find a person who you can help that kid disclose to, because that's a really big deal, and that's a really big secret.
So I have a question just regarding incident reports again.
Yeah.
What if the person that you're worried about is an adult, 18, 19 years old, they do not count as a minor? Is it something that you still have to report because you know the person is harming or is in an abusive situation? Though they are not a minor, they are a team worker with you, a colleague, or just a friend.
That's interesting. I don't know, because the information that I have comes directly from the laws around minors, because they're considered vulnerable peoples. So I'm not totally sure what the legal ramifications of that are. I'm going to go with common sense would say, especially if that is a fellow young lifer, like somebody who you are responsible to each other, I would say it's really important that you don't try and carry the weight of that secret by yourself, for the same reasons. None of us should have to carry those secrets, right? Those are big secrets. But yeah, I'll look into that for you.
Sarah, I can help speak to that if you want. So you can actually have a person, even a minor, they can self-report by calling one of the, anonymous like hotlines where they, for teens, or there's also hotlines for that in your area. And as long as, because the person on the other end of that phone call can take a statement, they're trained to take a statement, and they're also a counselor. So they can self-report, and they can self-report anonymously, and that will actually be documented as a disclosure. And then also, if you're not sure, you can have them, for example, call that number and say you know what, I think I'm in an abusive relationship, and they'll help that person unpack whether they are or not, so that you're not suggesting that, so that they can, that counselor will help them come to that conclusion and That way you're not taking statements and keeping secrets and trying to help this person through something that you're not qualified to help them through.
That's fair.
Thank you, Rachel. And I did just try and look it up, and it looks like it's not a legal requirement for somebody between the ages of 19 and 65. But apparently once you hit 65, you go back to needing to disclose. So.
Okay, yeah, because that was just kind of
what I found briefly. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That kind of answers it. It was just, if it was a person you knew, I just wanted to know if that still counts as a young life incident report. But there we go. That answers my question. So thank you very much.
If it's a young life person who's being harmed by a young life person, then yes, that still counts as an incident report. We have to report for sure. And that can happen if there's any kind of something between leaders that happens, or between a kid and a leader, we absolutely report all of those things. So, or an injury of a leader while we're on a trip, we report those as well. All right, I want to move on from that because I want to wrap up really fast, but I just really want to quickly talk about social media. I'm just curious what kind of boundaries you guys are having with kids around social media, because I find that when we talk about it as a larger group, we often come up with better ideas. So we're just going to take 5 minutes and do that. Does anybody have great ideas they have around boundaries with kids with social media? James.
Follow the same gender, follow back the opposite gender. In terms of Instagram. So if you get a follow from a girl, then you can follow her back, but don't
follow first.
But you can follow someone of your own gender.
Gotcha. Okay, that's not a bad idea. That's a good thought, James. So did everyone understand that? So you can seek out and follow somebody of your, because when you follow, that's how you can interact on Instagram. But don't follow back, or don't follow somebody first who's the opposite gender. But you can respond to their follow. That's a great idea, James. That's a good boundary. Yes, Shiloh?
Also, if it's a question about club or a question about whatever, I feel like answering the question's fine, for opposite gender. But don't make conversation, or don't ask questions to that person in that thread.
So some of our leaders are young, right? And so sometimes we have kids who come, they come because that man leader is really cute, or that girl leader is really hot. And so they might intentionally always ask that person the question. And I think, Shiloh, that makes a lot of sense. Don't respond in such a way that you're giving kids any idea that you're interested in a one-on-one conversation. And again, as soon as that happens, you can invite someone else in. So good answer, Shiloh. Anybody else? How are you dealing with social media? Is anybody Snapchatting kids? I'm curious. So what does that look like for you guys? What kind of boundaries do you have with that?
The kids in Princeton literally aren't on anything except for Snapchat and TikTok.
That's fair.
They're on Instagram, but they don't talk there.
So what are some things that you can do to make sure that you're covered on Snapchat?
Well, I just was like, I'm going to go make sure that there aren't any girls on my Snapchat. So
yeah, you can be in the same Snap group, but don't be friends with them.
You can be in the same Snap group without being friends?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's a great answer. Awesome.
Does that limit the messaging between, does that, you have to be friends to message?
Yeah, if you're not friends, they won't get, you can send them messages, but they won't get it. They just don't receive it.
They don't get one, but you can still both message in a group.
Yeah.
So they can all.
To be honest, my understanding of the inner workings of Snapchat is loose.
Sarah, I was going to say one of the things you can do too is if it's just through conversation on Snapchat, there's a way you can actually save the conversation. So everything that one of your kids would be sending to you, you can actually save that on. So it's as soon as you go there, it would have all the information there.
You can, Aaron. The trick key part is that if it's one-on-one, you can't prove that your saved conversation is the only conversation. That's what makes Snapchat different.
Right. Yeah. I was just using that as an example, though, is like any of my Young Life kids that I've had on there in the past, I just made sure that I turned that on. And then it's like I have, at least 75% of our conversation documented, which, as you're saying, it's not fully protected, but that's just one thing. It's a boundary.
Yeah, it's better than nothing for sure. Just be aware of the fact that it doesn't necessarily.
And I still talk to them just like one-on-one.
Right, because I would say that's definitely a thing right now that's happening. Is a lot of kids have switched over to Snapchat. That's like one of the only ways to communicate with like 10 of my kids.
So now we know that we can do a group without being a friend, which is a really handy thing to know. Thank you for that. Over there, Katie. Yes, Brayden.
So one of my leaders had a question of if I was friends with somebody, with a student before I became a leader, can I continue those conversations in that relationship in that way? Or now because I'm a leader, does the leader relationship take priority at that point?
So the reality is that you don't, with the social media stuff, we don't have like clear policies in Young Life about you can use this one, you can't use this one, you can. What we have is these are some really strong guidelines that are meant for you to understand the risks that you are taking. Because of the social media world, because of the way that messaging works, we just are more at risk for things like accusations than we were before. Yeah. And so the risk you choose to take is up to you. I would say don't start any new relationships with kids. But for instance, like I know there's a difference between the relationships I have personally with some of my kids' friends and the relationship I have with them as a Young Life leader. And sometimes those get messy and I have to take the risk and manage the risk myself about where am I going to let those lines be blurred. And so I would say that for you, like obviously we, especially in small communities, we have people that are in our lives for other reasons because they're family friends or because we were friends with them before. Just make sure that you're really clear about the risks you are managing because you are putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, Shallow.
Is that the same for like if a junior leader is in the circle of a leader like group? Like as a junior leader, I'm friends with leaders.
So I'm going to just make really clear what is never okay and is Young Life policy, regardless if you were friends before, is Shiloh, yes, you can have those like friendships, relationships, but absolutely leaders cannot date a kid in a club. It doesn't matter if you are dating and you're 2 years apart and one of you graduates, you cannot be a leader in that club. Just FYI, that's not a thing. So that is a very clear policy in Young Life. There is absolutely no dating between leaders and teens. So, and Shiloh, I'm really sorry that I went there and I can see you turning red because I know that's not exactly what you're asking at all. But I think it's really important that we establish that because that's the place that's not gray. But yes, Shiloh, obviously our junior leaders have a different friendship with us than our fellow leaders have a different friendship with us than your average kids. So. All right, anything that I missed or somebody feels like needs to get added or the world will implode? Anything? Brayden, you're so thorough.
I'm sorry. So one thing I wanted to ask about is like with our social media, we post photos of students from camp. Is that okay?
Yeah, as long as they have the form for camp, it's fine because it actually says in the form, it has that photo thing.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and so, kids can post whatever they want. You can't unless you have that.
So then with posting, like one thing we want to work on is like, and if it's not okay, we won't of course work on it, but doing pictures of club and do a recap post of it. At that point, because we haven't ever used that photo consent form, is like what would the situation look like there? Like,
then you get kids who haven't been to camp that photo request form so that you can do that.
Okay, so if they've consented on the camp form, are they good for any photo?
That is my understanding.
Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
So they just have to fill out one of those photo forms once.
Okay, awesome.
But be really, really careful, even when you do camp. Like sometimes we get those forms and we don't actually look at them. You need to go and look at them, because there are kids whose parents do not tick that box and consent to photos.
Okay.
And they have reasons for that. You know, if you've got kids who are coming from a foreign country, or you've got kids who are in foster care, there's all kinds of reasons kids. And then if it's camp, you need to let camp know right away, because that also affects their social media as well.
Okay. And what was it? Oh shoot, I forgot it.
Sorry, buddy. All right. Adrian, anything else?
No, I don't think so. Just going back to the forms, you can read the form yourself, and it's really clear on the form, those health forms, those photo forms. What is this saying yes to? What is it not? And so that can be a way that you can, as you come up with new questions, that's a resource for you. Any staff, you've got these resources on Mission Central. All this information that Sarah has shared will be there, and other details. You know, as well. So that information's there. These questions that will come up, guaranteed someone's going to ask a question in 5 minutes when our call is done. And these are great questions. Feel free to interact with them locally. If you need be, you can send something my way or Sarah's way if you've all of a sudden realized there's a huge question that now needs an answer, because maybe you're in that situation. But thank you, Sarah, for hosting this. Really appreciate it. Great job. We're grateful for you. Yep, there you go. There's some applause.
Please send to open. I noticed you clapped last.
And thanks everybody for taking the time to be there.
Okay, that's enough.
All right, enough clapping. Thanks everybody for being on the call, especially in the Kootenays, who are an hour ahead. So it's 10:02 their time. So thanks so much for being with us, and really appreciate you taking the time to understand what can you do to help kids be safe, to help you be safe, and to help young life be safe. And we really care about that. That's why we do this on an annual basis, because it really matters that we're doing our best for kids, and that we are equipping you so that the best is done for you as well. So that's, again, what all this is about. Remember your 4 R's, and always ask questions. If I can just reiterate that, I wonder, please ask, don't wait, hurry up and ask. But thanks, Sarah, thanks everyone. And